Köszönöm szépen, miniszterelnök úr, most pedig felkérem Marco Rubio urat, az Amerikai Egyesült Államok külügyminiszterét, hogy tegye meg nyilatkozatát.
Well, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for welcoming us here today. It's an honor to be with you in this incredibly gorgeous city. It's my first time being here, and it's phenomenal, even to be in this hall, where and the history behind it and everything that's going on here. The second is, you know, the relationship. You talked about the golden age, which is not an exaggeration. The relationship between the United States and Hungary today is as close as I can possibly imagine it being. And it's not just close rhetorically, it's close in action and things that are actually happening. And I think some evidence of that is here today in the agreement that we've just signed that builds on a historic meeting that we had in November at the White House that you had with the President and that I happen to have the honor to be present and be a part of it. The signed agreement we've had today is one that we hope will be many in the years to come, that areas of collaboration. You spoke about the 17 investments. To those who think that Hungary is being isolated, that's an example of the fact that that's not the case, that under the Prime Minister's leadership, in fact, there is a growing number of American companies, as evidenced by the 17 that have already arrived, who want to invest in your economy and want to be a part of what's happening here and are excited about it because you have strong leadership. Because you have leadership that we know are going to protect investments and allow it to continue to be a place that's friendly for business and be competitive with rules that are competitive that allow businesses to grow and prosper in comparison to other places. And there's so many other areas that we can work together on, especially on energy, but just so many areas of common interest. But I have to say this because it's important to understand. We are entering this golden era of relations between our countries, and not simply because of the alignment of our people, but because of the relationship that you have with the President of the United States. I don't think, you know, it is any mystery and should not be a mystery to anyone here how the President feels about you, how he interacted with you in his first term as President, and now in his second term as President, that relationship's grown even closer. And it's important to understand how important the relations between leaders are to the relations between countries. We are, at the end of the day, we are still human, we are still people, and that person-to-person connection that you've established with the President has made all the difference in the world in building this relationship and in hopefully growing this relationship even more. It is the kind of thing that I think, for example, I can say to you with confidence that President Trump is deeply committed to your success because your success is our success. Because this relationship we have here in Central Europe through you is so essential and vital for our national interests in the years to come that, you know, if you face financial struggles, if you face things that are impediments to growth, if you face things that threaten the stability of your country, I know that President Trump will be very interested because of your relationship with him and because of this importance to this country, to us, to finding ways to provide assistance if that moment ever were to arise, and obviously with regards to finances and the like. I also think it's the reason why in your visit in November you saw an extension and a suspension of the imposition of sanctions and allowed to move forward on energy. It was because of that personal relationship. It's because we want you to continue, because we want this economy to prosper, we want this country to do well. It's in our national interest. Especially as long as you're the Prime Minister and the leader of this country, it's in our national interest that Hungary be successful. It helps America, and obviously it helps you. So it's an honor to be with you here today. We have a lot that we can continue to work on. We also want to thank you, and I want to thank you on behalf of the President of the United States for the indispensable role you played on the Board of Peace. Not everyone's on the Board of Peace, and not everyone, you know, for different reasons, they can be participants or not be participants, but you are, and you've been there from the very first day. And again, a testament to the personal relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Orban that I think speaks volumes. The role you play geopolitically, the role you play even outside of this region in affairs involving the Middle East is invaluable and indispensable, and we are very appreciative of it. And that's why after traveling to Munich for the security conference, I wanted to make sure we paid a visit here to continue to build on this relationship and to signal very clearly that not only are we in a golden age, but we haven't even scratched the surface of what we can achieve together as a people, as peoples, as nations, and as leaders. And so I thank you for the opportunity to be with all of you here today, and thank you for the very warm invitation and the very important conversations that we had, where we touched on a bunch of subjects and a bunch of topics that I think will be of great interest back in Washington when I return. Thank you.
Külügyminiszter úr, köszönöm szépen. Most néhány kérdésre van időnk. A magyar televíziót kérem először.
Jó napot kívánok, Mészáros László vagyok a Magyar Televíziótól. Volodymyr Zelenszkij ukrán elnök folyamatosan támadja Orbán Viktor miniszterelnök urat, amiért nem támogatja Ukrajna uniós csatlakozását. Önök miként értékelik ezt a politikai akciót, politikai támadást egy NATO tag és egy uniós taggal szemben? Köszönöm.
És kitől kérdezte ezt tőlem, vagy a külügyminiszter?
Bocsánat, mindkettőjüktől kérdezném természetesen.
Igen. Nem akarom belerángatni a külügyminiszter urat magyar belpolitikai diskurzusokba. Ha megengedek, akkor válaszolok először. If you allow me, I start to answer first to this question. Az ukránok nyilvánvalóan, és az elnökük beszálltak a magyar választási kampányba. Egy ideig gondolkodtam, hogy ezt nehezményezzük-e vagy nem. Végül is ilyen brutális nyíltsággal beleszállni egy másik ország választási kampányába nem túl gyakori. De aztán rájöttem, hogy ez érthető. Mert persze a magyar választás elsősorban a magyar emberek számára a legfontosabb. De van hatása Magyarországon kívül is. És az ukránok joggal gondolják azt, hogy jelentősége van annak, hogy milyen kormánya lesz Magyarországnak. És két opció van csak. Az egyik az, amit önök jól ismernek, ez a magyar nép opciója, akik egy szavazáson, a Vox 2025-ön világosan elmondták, hogy nem vállalják, hogy Ukrajna belépjen az Európai Unióba, mert ez a meggyőződésünk, hogy ez belerántana bennünket a háborúba, és tönkretenni a gazdaságunkat. És azt is tudhatják, hogy mi nem adjunk pénzt Brüsszelnek azért, hogy azt utána Ukrajnába küldje. A másik lehetőség, ami egy valódi lehetőség, és az ukránok ezt szeretnék, és ezt józan ésszel be is láthatjuk, hogyha egy olyan kormány jönne, amely azt akarja, vagy elfogadja legalábbis, hogy Ukrajna tagja lesz az Európai Uniónak, és hogy olyan kormányt akarnak, amely részt vállal Ukrajna pénzügyi terheinek viselésében, vagyis küld pénzt Ukrajnába. Ez a helyzet. És az ukránok számára nem mindegy, hogy dől el ez a választás. Ezért úgy döntöttek, hogy részt vesznek ebben a kampányban. És miután mi a józan ész talaján állunk, ezen nem kell meglepődnünk. Inkább alkalmazkodni kell hozzá. Tehát tudomásul kell vennünk, hogy ennek a választásnak aktív szereplője lesz az ukrán elnök és Ukrajna. És nekünk velük szemben is győznünk kell, ez a realitás. Minden más, ami ehhez kapcsolódik, a háború jövője és így tovább, finanszírozás, ezek meghaladják a sajtótájékoztató kereteit, mert bele se vágok, csak az egyetlen aspektushoz térek vissza, ez egy választás. A választáson az emberek döntenek, és Ukrajna számára nem mindegy, hogy ez a döntés milyen lesz, és ezért ők teljes testsúllyal és fegyverzettel részt vesznek a magyar kampányban. Tudjuk egyébként, hogy finanszírozzák is az ellenfeleinket, tudjuk, hogy ez hogyan történik, ez egy leírt, jegyzett, ismert dolog, de még egyszer mondom, nem fölháborodni kell, hanem tudomásul kell venni, hogy ez a választási kampány Magyarországon nemzetközi dimenzióval is rendelkezik. Más irányba is, de az ukrán irányba egyértelműen. Ezért ez egy fontos nemzetközi esemény, nem csak a magyaroknak, hanem, mint az ukránok például mutatja, más, nálunk nagyobb népeknek is fontos. Így kell választást nyerni. Nyertünk már mindenhogy, most majd így fogunk.
Well, my only comment is the United States' interest is to see the war end, and we want to do what we can to make it end. We're the only nation on earth that apparently can get both sides to the table to talk. I'm not here to insult anybody, but the United Nations hasn't been able to do it. There's no other country in Europe that's been able to do it. The United States has been successful at being able to get both sides to talk. I mean, for the first time, you know, I don't know, in a number of years, you actually have at a technical level military officials from both sides sat down last week in the Middle East, and we'll restart those talks again in Geneva later this week. I think that's a very positive thing. That said, you know, all we are trying to do is play a role if it's possible in reaching a deal. We're not seeking to impose a deal on anybody. We're not trying to force anyone to take a deal they don't want to take. We just want to help them because we think it's a war that's incredibly damaging. We think it's a war that's incredibly destructive. We think it's a war that never should have happened and should end as soon as possible. That's how the president feels, and the president's invested a tremendous amount of time and political capital in trying to serve a useful purpose, usually you know, in my time observing geopolitics, when a president tries to engage himself in peacemaking and in ending wars, that's usually applauded. So this is one of the few times, for a lot of different reasons, I don't know what they may be, but maybe I can speculate what they are, where people actually criticize a president trying to end a war. Usually when you're trying to end wars, the international community applauds you. This is one of the few wars I've ever seen where some people in the international community condemn you for trying to help end a war. But that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're going to continue to do as long as our role is in our engagement is a positive one. And hopefully the war will end. The sooner the better. It should have ended a long time ago. It should have never actually happened. This war should have never happened. This war would have never happened if Donald Trump had been president of the United States at the time it began. But you know, that's what happened, and so now here we are. So we're going to continue to do everything we can to try to bring it to an end. And if we can be successful at it, I think the world will be a better place. And if we can't, then unfortunately the suffering and the dying and the killing will continue, and that's not good for anybody, but that's where we find ourselves. So hopefully we can stop it, but let's see.
Next is CBS News, please. Olivia.
Thank you very much. Budapest is, in fact, beautiful. Mr. Secretary, on the notion of a golden age, why isn't the United States conditioning deeper cooperation with Budapest on Hungary reducing its extensive and ongoing deepening cooperation with China, which is a strategic rival for the United States? Secondly, if, despite President Trump's endorsement and your visit here, Prime Minister Orban does not succeed and loses the April election, does the U.S. commit to working with his challenger constructively? Prime Minister Orban, do you commit to accepting electoral defeat if it happens? And to both of you, Prime Minister Orban has said that the exemption that Hungary has been granted for Russian energy purchases is indefinite. The U.S. has said it was for 1 year. Which one is it? Thank you.
All right, well, let me start by answering that question. First of all, so everybody can be very clear. I've made this point repeatedly. I'll make it again. Under President Trump, it is our expectation that every nation on earth is going to act in their national interest. That's what nations are supposed to do. If the Prime Minister of Hungary does not act in the national interest of Hungary, he won't be Prime Minister for long. But who's going to act in the national interest of Hungary if their prime minister doesn't do it? If your government is not acting in your national interest, then who will? By the way, we feel the same way about America. So in those instances in which our national interest and some other countries' national interests are aligned, that is an opportunity for extraordinary partnership. And we have many, many areas where our national interests are aligned. Where they're not aligned or where we have some differences, that's where that alignment and the other issues, that's where this relationship, that's where these deep ties to one another are so important, because that's where you can find accommodation, that's where you can hear each other out, that's where maybe you can work together on. But we're not asking any country in the world to isolate themselves from anybody. We understand that every country in the world has to deal with the reality of their geography, of their economy, of their history, and of the challenges of their future. We will obviously share with partners and friends concerns we may have about certain things, but as an example, the United States, you mentioned China as an example. Okay, we have trade and relations with China. The President of the United States is going to travel in April to China. Why? Because China is a big country. It's got 1 billion-something people, second largest economy in the world. They have nuclear weapons. It would be crazy. Okay, it's insane for the United States and China not to have relations and interact with one another. Now, two big countries like this, do we have differences? We absolutely do. And we'll have to manage those differences. And some of those differences are things we've spoken very frankly and clearly and repeatedly about the fact that it is not good for the world. It's not good for anybody to rely on one country or one economy for 90% of anything, especially things like critical supply chains. This is a reality. We want to diversify supply chains around the world. We've spoken clearly about it. That's not an anti-China thing. That's just the reality that over-dependence on one source is not good, and especially when there's been a willingness in the past to use it as leverage against each other. But we pursue these things within the context of the U.S. national interest, and that's why we met with the Chinese in South Korea earlier in the year, and were able to reach an understanding on some trade matters. That was a mutual interest between us and them. So geopolitics is difficult because it requires a little bit of maturity and seriousness. Okay? It requires a little bit of seriousness about these things have real implications, and the balancing of relations between nation states requires maturity and seriousness. So our relationship here, you asked the last question about it. Look, I'm just telling you guys what it is. Okay? The president has an extraordinarily close relationship to the prime minister. He does, and it has had tangible benefits in our relationship. I'm not going to speculate about the future. You know, what happens in this country is up to the voters of this country to determine and decide, and we love the people of Hungary. But there's no reason to sugarcoat it. I'm going to be very blunt with you. The Prime Minister and the President have a very, very close personal relationship and working relationship, and I think it has been incredibly beneficial to the relationship between our two countries.
The sanctions waiver, is it a year?
What's that? I'm sorry?
The sanctions waiver on Russian energy purchases?
Yeah, but here's the way I would couch that. Those sanctions waivers happened as much as anything else because of the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President. And so I think all I can tell you is that relationship and the importance of that relationship and the importance of that relationship to our bilateral relationship underpins the decision the President made. And I think we'll continue to underpin it as long as that relationship is a factor in our bilateral relations.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So the answer to your question, for those who are relatively young, it's difficult to know the Hungarian modern political history. But if you look at it carefully, you see that I'm not just registered as the longest-serving Prime Minister in Europe, which means 20 years, but I'm the longest-serving leader of the opposition with 16 years, so I spent 16 years as leader of opposition.